Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles. I guarantee that you're going to be shocked by what you hear in this episode today. You're going to be shocked, and a lot of this, something that you will have never heard of before. I myself, when I learned about this information, was utterly shocked, but it has to be made known. As many of you know, I'm an investigative journalist. I specialize in exposing clerical predators, and I especially have a heart for victims, especially child victims. Back on April 26, 2023, a very courageous whistleblower came forward and presented her testimony before a congressional committee. Let's hear a few seconds from the start of that testimony.
Today, children will work overnight shifts at slaughterhouses, factories, restaurants to pay their debts to smugglers and traffickers. Today, children will be sold for sex. Today, children will call a hotline to report they are being abused, neglected, and trafficked, and we don't know if they're going to get the help they need. For nearly a decade, unaccompanied children have been suffering in the shadows, and I have to confess I knew nothing about their suffering until 2021 when I volunteered to help the Biden administration with the crisis at the southern border. As part of Operation Artemis, I was deployed to the Pomona Fairplex Emergency Intake Site in California to help HHS, Office of Refugee Resettlement, reunite children with sponsors in the United States. I thought I was going to help place children in loving homes. Instead, I discovered that children are being trafficked through a sophisticated network that begins with recruiting in home country, smuggling to the U.S. border, and ends when ORR delivers a child to a sponsor. Some sponsors are criminals and traffickers and members of transnational criminal organizations.
Well, that courageous whistleblower is named Tara Lee Rodas, and I am honored to welcome her to my show today. Tara, thank you so much for being on today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for shining a light on what we now know is government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking. So I really appreciate you.
Let's just jump right into it. You sent me a 2-page fact sheet yesterday before this interview. I was looking through it, and I have to tell you that I was utterly shocked. I've done a lot of digging into corruption during my career as an investigative journalist. I didn't know any of this. So let's just start from the beginning here, because I'm going to read some bits from your fact sheet. So you actually volunteered for the Unaccompanied Children program run by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and you said you started reporting incidents of smuggling and suspected child trafficking through HHS chain of command in June of 2021. You disclosed, well, first of all, tell us what you found out, and then tell us about the retaliation that you faced as a result.
Sure. And one thing that might be helpful for people to know is when they hear volunteers, sometimes they just think, well, it's an average person, but I was what was a federal volunteer. So people may remember that the administration at the beginning of 2021 sent out a call across all federal agencies to get vetted employees to help place these children coming across the border with sponsors here in the US. So I've worked for the federal government for more than 20 years. I'm a vetted employee, and so I was eligible to go and volunteer to help with the children, not knowing that one child had ever been trafficked through the program. So I'm there, I'm on the site, I'm a Spanish speaker. My husband is from El Salvador. And I thought, what better service could I give than to help these vulnerable children be reunited with their families? Because that's what it said we were going to do, is help put children with families. And I found out very quickly, it only took a couple of weeks working in case management, and children are crying, and the stories that they're telling to their case manager is not the same thing that the sponsor is telling, nor does it match what the case manager is hearing from home country. So that seemed very strange. And then I was hearing children screaming for their parents. And I thought, well, if we're sending to their parents, why is there all this drama? And it didn't take us but about 2 weeks of working when we realized that there were suspicious sponsors. And this is before I knew that one child had ever been trafficked through the program. So we found 2 of these suspicious sponsor cases. And then someone sent me the Senate report from 2016. And that's when I realized they knew. And they knew that children had been trafficked through the program for a decade. And so the 2016 report, the Senate report, which is online, anyone can find it, details how they lured children here back in 2014. And it's very elaborate, the scheme, how they lured the children, put them to work. And so I thought, oh my goodness, people are taking advantage of these children and they're putting them to work in these labor camps. And I thought, what a horrible thing. And then we found cases where girls were being sponsored by men claiming to be family members, and then we find out that they're not. And that's when people started saying, well, there's also sex trafficking. And I thought, this is unbelievable what I'm seeing. So we started reporting all of these cases, and it eventually led to them retaliating against me, because once I learned that high-level members of transnational criminal organizations were involved in the operation, I went then outside chain of command and reported it to the Office of Inspector General for Department of Justice. And that led to, in less than 3 weeks, me being taken off a high-profile case, being threatened with investigation, and then walked off the site with security.
I want to interrupt for a moment because you said transnational organizations and things like that. I was shocked to read that some of these young children were being put in the hands of MS-13 gang members.
Yes. 18th Street Gang, Russian Balkan crime syndicates. And this I discovered because of a brave whistleblower from DHS. So there is a true American hero. His name is Aaron Stevenson. Once a Marine, always a Marine, right? He was a Marine. He dedicated his life to public service with Department of Homeland Security. He actually worked what was called the TOC mission, which is transnational organized crime. And he identified in early 2021, when all the restrictions were lifted off of this program and children were just being funneled through the system, he identified the very first case ever of a person on the TOC watch list, the transnational organized crime watch list, attempting to sponsor kids. And then it just started skyrocketing. And so now we have members of transnational organized crime operating here in the United States, and they are using these children for nefarious things.
You appeared in a Project Veritas expose back in November. I encourage everybody to go, please watch that. It's very disturbing. They interview girls who give direct testimony of being trafficked, sex trafficked, brought in thinking they're going to have a better life in America, sent to these so-called sponsors, and the sponsors end up pimping them out. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So when I learned that the children were being trafficked through a sophisticated network, so they're not just being smuggled. Smuggled is one thing, which means they're, transporting them, but trafficking means there's force, fraud, or coercion. When I learned that they were actually trafficking, that it was a sophisticated network from home country all across Mexico, and that these people view children as a commodity. So the sex trafficking trade is a multi-billion-dollar trade. I didn't know this when I first deployed for this mission. But police officers explained to me, they're like, look, you can sell a kilo of Coke one time, but once they have a child, they can sell that child over and over and over again. And that's what they were doing. I was hearing stories of the children who were being prostituted across Mexico. We had one little boy, he was only 8 years old. And the case manager completely distraught. She said, Tara, I just don't understand how somebody could do this to a child. She said, my child. She said, whose case I'm working on. He's only 8. And he's in diapers now because he was sexually abused the entire way. And this is what's happening to the children. And I had no idea. And so I couldn't remain silent. Jesus is very serious about how we treat his children, and God's children are not for sale. And so I felt it was important to come forward and to tell these stories. And when I had come forward through every chain that I knew, reported to every law enforcement that I could, I then was waiting, for action. I'm looking at the news and, trying to see, are they recovering children? And when I didn't see immediate action, that's when I went to Project Veritas and James O'Keefe. They sent crews, they knocked on doors, and it was horrific what the children were telling them. So there were so many young children, like a little girl, and she's been placed in a home with 5 men, 1 room. It's a 1-room place, and 5 men are living there with a little girl who's like 5 or 6 years old. The 15-year-old who says she's being pimped out by her sponsor, who claims to be her aunt, but she's never met this woman before, and was pimping her out in the house where she was living. I can't imagine what the lives of these children must be like. And so that's when I realized how severe the situation was. And so it's a terrible, terrible thing, but we can't remain silent. We need people to stand up for these children who have no voice of their own. We need people to pray that these children will be rescued and that these criminals will be prosecuted, that they will repent too.
Yeah. You mentioned what Jesus says about children, how serious he is. I mean, he says it's better if if a millstone be put around their neck and they be thrown into the sea. A millstone is what they used in the ancient days to grind wheat. It's a massive stone that weighs about a ton. Putting that around someone's neck and throwing them into the sea. That's how serious and grave this is. Let me ask you, how do these people become sponsors? How do they become sponsors if they're not actually family members? What sort of proof do they have to give?
Well, that is the problem, is that the system is designed to have limited oversight. So the Pomona Fairplex processed over 8,300 children in less than 6 months. No one on our site, no one was an investigator or law enforcement. So how much vetting can be done? So how does somebody become a sponsor? They just simply send in some paperwork. And since no one is a document expert, certainly not international documents who were working on our site to be able to tell if the documents were real or not, they were sending in literally photographs of birth certificates, and that was acceptable proof of relationship. And yet one of the high-profile cases I worked on was a man in his early 20s who sponsored a 15-year-old girl, sent in birth certificates to show they were brother and sister. And then after she's released, we see the two of them in a sexy embrace. He's posted this on his WhatsApp because that's how documents were sent back and forth by WhatsApp. And then she's all by herself, all made up, her shirt unbuttoned. And this is what was happening. So there really is not any serious vetting. How much vetting of a sponsor can be done? So when a child comes to us, sometimes they have a phone number, a name, it's sewn in their clothes, it's given to them by the people who transported them. They're told, this is who you're going to, this is your aunt, this is your mom or dad, whoever it is. And then the US government is spending billions of dollars to then take these children into care and then buy their plane tickets or train tickets to send those kids directly to the sponsor.
I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Real Estate for Life. Are you looking to buy or sell a home? Maybe you want to move to a more family-friendly place? Real Estate for Life can help you with that. I myself have used them twice, once to sell a home, another time to buy a home. In both cases, they paired me with a professional who shared my values, plus he gave a cut of his commission to a pro-life charity of my choice. Real Estate for Life is a multinational company that connects pro-life home seekers with realtors and professionals who share their values. When you buy or sell a home with Real Estate for Life, the agent will give a share of his commission to the charity that you have chosen. So for instance, on a house worth $180,000, approximately $1,000 of that will go to the pro-life charity of your choice. And that's all without costing you a penny. It really is a win-win. So to connect with a pro-life realtor, please go to realestateforlife.org. That's realestateforlife.org. Let me ask you something. You reported what you found, as any person should, and then instead of them lauding you and praising you and thanking you for finding out this evil is taking place, they retaliate against you. Why on earth would government officials retaliate against you over this? Why?
Money. That's what I always say. Follow the money. It's billions of dollars. The contractor at our site, it was an $800 billion contract. Okay.
Wow.
For only 6 months. The senior, and all of this is available on usaspending.com. usaspending.com, anybody can go in. They can look at the agency, HHS, then look at the ORR, which is Office of Refugee Resettlement, and then dig one level down into Unaccompanied Children Program, so the UC program, and they can see all the spending. It's been billions of dollars over the last 2 years.
And so you said $800 billion.
I'm sorry, million.
Oh, million.
$800 million.
But still,
for
that's a
our
lot.
site. Sorry, $800 million
for a 6-month contract. Where is that money? Is that just federal money?
Yeah, it's federal money going to a contractor. Yeah. And the head guy on our site, who I was in meetings with, his salary was $51,000 a month. So what incentive is there if somebody sees something to say something, because they're going to be losing a lot of money? Nobody wants to lose that amount of money. And of course, no one in the federal government wants to be seen as the trafficker in chief. And that is exactly what we have happening right now. They are aware of it. In the Obama-Biden administration is when they first saw this explosion of labor trafficking. They knew about it then. So one of the first things this administration did was take out background checks for the sponsors. They then said you don't have to. So in the past, you had to, if there was another person living in the home, that person, you had to know who that person was, how many adults were living in the home. Background checks had to be done on everyone who was 18 years or older to see if they were pedophiles or had been committing other crimes. And now they don't do any of that. So it's, it's a terrible thing. But the program itself has spent more than $10 billion with a B, but the contract at the one site in 6 months was $800 million. And that doesn't even include the midnight flights. You know, they were buying flights for all of the children. So the traffickers were like, well, this is great because now we don't have to make the investment to move the product because we're charging the child. They have to pay their money to the cartels. They have to pay their debts. And so now we can get the child without even having to pay in the transportation from the border to the final destination, because the U.S. government is doing that. And the U.S. government is doing that with your tax dollars.
Wow. I know there's been a lot of criticism of the Biden administration over the crisis at the border, letting so many migrants just come across the border so easily. I mean, do you think that this is part of it? Do you think it's the money?
It is money. And it's also a way for people here in the United States. It's a terrible thing to admit, but we've got to look into the darkness and see what's true. As our country has left principles, biblical principles of morality, and begun to go down a path of it's okay to abuse a child, that a child is not the child of the parent, the child is the child of the government. The United States is one of the #1 consumers of child pornography and child sex trafficking. Now, a lot of times the people in the US would go to destinations. They'd go to Colombia, they'd go to Mexico, they'd go other places, but now they're just importing those children here. This is a crisis of huge proportion that is preying on vulnerable children and putting them into the sex trade.
It's just heartbreaking. It's so, they really are. I mean, they really are going after our children these days, and you see it everywhere. You see it everywhere. Let me ask you, have you gotten much of a response ever since you appeared on Project Veritas, as well as giving your congressional testimony?
Yes, there are a lot of law enforcement agencies who are very interested in the case. They've put human trafficking teams together. Of course, they're never obligated to tell you how many children they were able to rescue, so I don't know the answers to that. But Homeland Security investigations, Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General, other people at the Office of Inspector General for like Department of Justice and other things, they are aware. They've been forwarding cases and they're trying to, break up some of these rings. And when they are discovering that we have high-level criminal actors, it's my hope that they're going after them. So it's a little bit concerning that there was an FBI whistleblower, Steve Friend. He testified before the Weaponization Committee. He was taken off child pornography cases, child exploitation cases, trafficking cases to work other cases. Then you had the DHS whistleblower, Aaron Stevenson, taken off of and actually retaliated against and ultimately fired for coming forward with this information on the trafficking by these transnational criminal organizations. And then you had me being retaliated against. So you have multiple different parts of the government that are designed to care for children, and they're retaliating against all the people who are trying to come forward and tell the truth to protect the children. So it's very concerning. And that's why I'm so grateful that you contacted me and gave me the ability to tell the story, because people really need to pray for these vulnerable children who have no one who's coming to get them.
Well, everybody should be inviting you onto their platform to tell this, because this is horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying. I just want to repeat it for my viewers out there so that you understand exactly what's happening. Literally, US dollars, your money, taxpayer dollars are going into the hands of criminals like MS-13 gang members and the Russian mob and various other drug traffickers and sex traffickers, literally getting money to pimp out children. I mean, it's just, it's unbelievable. It really is. But let me talk a little bit about this history of trafficking in the HHS UC program, because on your fact sheet, as you mentioned at the start of this interview, this has been going on for a long time. We have a 2014 newspaper article from the Washington Post titled "Overwhelmed Federal Officials Released Immigrant Teens to Traffickers." 2014. Then you have Senator Rob Portman's remarks at the 2016 congressional hearing. HHS puts children in the hands of traffickers. 2016 congressional report, which I believe you mentioned, protecting unaccompanied alien children from trafficking and other abuses. That's 2016. So this has been going on for a long time.
Yes, it has. And I had no idea when I volunteered for this mission that one child had ever been trafficked through this program. So it's been a terrible shock. I have never been that close to the darkness of seeing such evil that man is capable of. So I think if somebody would have asked me, Tara, do you believe in the depravity of man? I would have said, sure, of course, I do. But when you see it, and it's stunning to think that people can do these wicked things to children. And to know right now, today, a child is going to be sold for sex. It's a terrible, terrible revelation. And many people, and part of the reason that I went to help was I thought by, going to the border and helping with the crisis, it was the right thing to do. And what I've learned is the way the border has been weaponized, and because it's being controlled by the cartels and traffickers, it's absolutely inhumane. And it is terrible for the children, terrible for the children. And those, remember, the 85,000 children right now, HHS admitted before Congress, okay, we don't know where they are. We can't say. 85,000 children in 2 years gone. That doesn't make sense. And
No.
remember, that's only the ones that have come through our program. So that's only the children who were turned into Customs and Border and then transferred to HHS. The other children coming across the border with people, they're also in the same situation. Yeah, Department of Justice put out last month, they arrested 2 people who came across the border with 2 girls. One was 10, one was 15. They were beating them. They said they were their children. They're not their children at all. They trafficked them into the United States. But if you come across the border as a family unit or claim you're a family unit, you're much more likely to be released. And so they released the whole family. There's no DNA testing now, so there's no proof for sure that these are your children. They could just claim it when they walk up to someone, and they were let into the country, and the girls were kept inside the house as slaves. They were beaten. The 15-year-old was only allowed to leave for work. Occasionally, they would let her go out and work and took all of her pay. So these are the situations. So it's not humanitarian. I thought I was going to help a humanitarian mission, and I've learned it's not because of who's in control.
Wow. You talk about being that close to the darkness. It really is nothing short of diabolical. It really is. I recently covered the case of a traditionalist Catholic priest who pled guilty to child porn. He was found with 12,000 images, 1,300 video files of the worst child porn imaginable, involving children, infants, toddlers being abused, raped, tortured, forced to have sex with adults, with animals, even with objects. I guarantee that a number of those images and files involved missing children smuggled in or trafficked through this HHS program.
Yes, this is a terrible, terrible shock. And I can understand how people might think, how could this be true? Because I was there. I'm looking at the evidence and I'm going, oh no, I don't want to see this or know this. And I just made the decision, well, with God's help, that this is the right thing to do. We have to tell the truth. We have to let people know what's going on.
I hope you're enjoying the show. The rest of the show is behind the paywall, so please go to churchmilitant.com to watch the rest. For those who are not premium subscribers, you can sign up at churchmilitant.com/go premium. See you there.